these days, whenever nu metal is discussed, it's discussed in kind of a mocking way. I think a lot of people laugh about this as opposed to reminisce upon it fondly. But during the latter 90s and the first part of the 2000s, nu metal was absolutely massive. There was nowhere that you could go where nu metal wasn't there in some way, shape, or form, whether it be just fans of the music itself, either that or perhaps some merchandise. These bands were a big deal. They were right there on par with the boy and girl bubblegum pop groups. Essentially, after you got out of your pop phase, you graduated to nu metal. And it was huge also for the decade it was in, considering it seemed to match up with it so perfectly. The 1990s were already about teenage angst with grunge, and attitude and sarcasm and being cocky because of video games and all forms of media. And now you have bands that were talking about inner strife, inner demons, and being very loud, extreme, in your face. They were like the X Games of music. And it's no surprise that some of them also ended up being part of X Games soundtracks and things like that alongside of other hardcore punk bands. We need to talk about some of these groups because there were a lot that were able to rule the world for a short period of time before metalcore took over, at least in the rock and heavy metal landscape. However, these bands still continue to have a massive appeal and still are played a lot of times on alternative radio stations, even within their basic rotation, not even as classics. So let's talk about some of these bands. These are the top 10 nu metal bands, at least in my opinion. Give me your list in the comments below while mine's being represented, and let's get started. Number 10 is the band Snot. Now, this might not be a name that is as well known to you as some of the others that we're going to talk about, but that's because Snot only had one album of major, repute, and that was an album entitled Get Some. And to say that it was major might be taking things a little bit too far. I only remember one song off of the album, which was entitled Stupid, and it was misspelled Botch. Edgy. Unfortunately, after this album was released, lead singer Lynn Straits was killed in an automobile accident that also claimed the life of the dog that was featured on the cover of Get Some. And what happened afterward is kind of amazing. He was known within the nu metal community, and as a result, there were tribute concerts as well as a tribute album that were organized and, of course, eventually released. This brought together a lot of the heavy hitters of nu metal and also helped to project its reach a lot further. Now you had a place where you could sample all of these different bands in one place, and they were paying tribute to songs that Lynn himself was writing for potential release on a future Snot record. This also gave us Angel Sun, which was the Seven Dust cover, or Seven Dust song rather, that appeared on one of the tribute albums, and then also would later appear on a Seven Dust release. There were two different music videos for this as well, so this song had a double dose of popularity. They might not be the biggest name, but they're definitely one that showed the unity among nu metal artists and how they were going to work to get themselves marketed and out there. Number 9 is Nonpoint. Nonpoint might also not be a name that you're extremely familiar with. It might just be more so a name than anything, considering this is a band that has been around for 20 years. And it shows their discography is massive. 13 or 14 studio albums, something along those lines. So chances are, if you've been into a record store, if you've looked in the metal section, you've probably seen a Nonpoint record or three. And they have been consistent within their sound. They've been shifting it up now and again to incorporate a little bit more of the rock side, or maybe even go a little bit more fringe line standard heavy metal, but that range is what gives them a lot of dynamisty. And it's also what's given them a career after nu metal had winded down. Nonpoint's one of those solid groups that you always want to have in a lineup for a live show as well, considering I saw them actually do an opening gig for Saliva, and they were fantastic. I actually thought that Nonpoint could have very easily have been the frontrunner of that show. But either way, Nonpoint's one of those steady-as-she-goes bands that could still actually apply to some of you guys today. You might listen to the stuff and end up really liking it, and then be surprised to learn that they're considered nu metal. Number 8 is Staind. The story of Staind and Aaron Lewis and the boys is very, very strange. They started off with an independently released album. They were on a bill that included Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit, and he wanted to kick him off because the cover of that album, which is now really, really hard to find, made him think that they were Satanists. Oh boy, Fred obviously hasn't looked at a lot of, heavy metal covers at all. But either way, he was actually so impressed by their performance that he signed them to his record label, and that's where Staind came to be. They released Break the Cycle, which had huge singles, and then as they progressed, they got even bigger. During the first portion of the 2000s, this band was massive, one of the biggest products of the nu metal lineup, and Aaron Lewis became a celebrity all his own. As things progressed, though, this band really seemed to temper down. Whenever Aaron got happy and sung about happier things, it seemed like the music really suffered, and then eventually, Aaron went back to the one thing that he kind of wanted to do from the start: country music. Yeah, really, really odd, this band, but Staind was a huge influence. Not to mention, there were a lot of folks that loved the crooning that went along with the nu metal aggressive sound. Maybe Aaron Lewis is one of the reasons why a lot of people turned into country boys and country girls after nu metal went out the pasture. Number 7 is Disturbed. We, of course, just talked about a new Disturbed album in 2018, but 20 years ago, whenever The Sickness came out, this band was a huge deal and hot property. They immediately got a jump start with their career, and they really did not look back. And that's the one thing that was very positive for these guys. And they did something else that was pretty intelligent. They were known for some of their guttural or weird noises that were uttered during some of the songs of The Sickness. David Draymond and company didn't want to be known solely for that gimmick, and instead transitioned themselves out of that phase and instead into one that felt a little bit more solid. The songwriting gelled a little bit. It didn't really mature much for a while, but they went and dabbled with some covers and stuff to showcase their dynamisty. And then here in the 2010s, they've gotten a bit of a revitalization because of an old school pop song, because of the Sound of Silence. Wow. It's amazing to see how nu metal began and then what Disturbed became, these days. Number 6 is System of a Down. Now this one's debatable probably for some. System of a Down? A nu metal band? Actually, yeah. It actually makes perfect sense, especially whenever you go all the way back to songs such as Chop Suey or their self-titled record. Even going into Toxicity, it still really fits the whole entire mold. Remember, it's just a musical scene. It's not really necessarily a bad thing if a band that evolved and eventually became something different remain sort of glued a bit to their roots, considering that's one of the reasons that they came to the dance. If System of a Down, for example, had been like a chamber pop band in 1998, chances are they wouldn't have gotten too far, and chances are those classifying them as that would be really, really confusing people to talk to. But System of a Down became really big because of their chaotic style, not to mention some of their different influences that came together. This is a band that felt a little bit more than just your conventional chugga 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 nu metal band that was using simplified riffs in order to deliver a message that was more so geared toward the lyricism. Instead, this was a band that felt a little bit more complete, that brought a lot of different influences within. Maybe you could call them the Beatles of nu metal. That seems really, really weird. Number 5 is Limp Bizkit. The memes about Limp Bizkit will never end. Sometimes you just want to break somebody's face. Sometimes you just gotta have faith. That's actually the first song of theirs that I ever heard. I heard Faith, which is a George Michael cover. Couldn't imagine a metal band was doing that, and loved what I heard. $3 Bill Y'all was pretty cool. I actually enjoyed that album whenever I was a youth, as well as the first half of Significant Other. But this band was even more than that. They were a cultural phenomenon. Fred Durst was literally on top of the world. Who knew, though, that only a couple of years later, Fred Durst would be on the bottom of the world. Yeah, he'd be doing more acting than he would be singing. And we're still waiting for, Dance of the Disco Elephants, or whatever the heck this new album's supposed to be called. It's Stampede of the Disco Elephants? Who cares? But yeah, Fred Durst was the seminal and probably the most outright display of what nu metal was. There was the combination of rapping and rhyming within the music. There was aggressiveness, there was yelling and screaming. Not to mention his voice is one of the most easy to decipher and easy to understand within the whole entire subgenre. This is one of the biggest bands that was a part of the nu metal idea, sales-wise as well. Significant Other, I think, did 1 million in its first week, which is absolutely absurd. This band was huge, but it didn't last. After Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water, which was a bomb, terrible album, they released a lot of relative crap and eventually dissipated until we've had this 5-year-long wait for Stampede of the Disco Elephants. They were big whenever they were big, though. Number 4, the Deftones. And again, this is another one of those bands similar to System of a Down where people might say, really? These guys are a nu metal band? Well, go back and listen to Adrenaline. Go back and listen to parts of Around the Fur. The Deftones that you know today that released albums such as Coin and Yukon is definitely a different band back in the 1990s. They perfectly suited the scene, and it was certainly one that was accented, I think, beautifully by their song Be Quiet and Dry. This is one of those tracks that just feels awash with memories of the late 1990s, and really, whenever you think about these memories, they seem to come across as the hazy delivery of the music videos themselves. It's absolutely crazy whenever you consider it. However, the Deftones were a band that was to evolve and become something more than just their nu metal property. White Pony was the album that showed them as a more dynamic band, one that was really pushing the envelope of what nu metal could really be all about, becoming a little bit more of a transitional or a hybrid product. And as a result, the Deftones still have a career today, and one that is still extremely fruitful, despite the passage of Chai Chang, and despite the fact that they have shed, effectively, their nu metal roots. Number 3 is Slipknot. Yeah, Slipknot. I'm not kidding. This is a nu metal band. This is a nu metal band. Whenever their first album came out, this was arguably the heaviest of the nu metal bands. This is arguably the group that was the closest to traditional, conventional heavy metal. And in fact, most people would probably classify them simply as that. But I honestly have no problem with that. I think that's perfectly fine. You do what you want. However, Slipknot showcased to a whole entire audience that was already consuming angrier or at least harder and heavier music that there was an even larger and harder and heavier button that they could potentially get to. The chaos that was showcased and displayed on the self-titled album was one that was extremely legendary and built a band that would become a monolith. The Maggots, with their fan base, are still very present these days, and any time that Slipknot is discussed, it is immediately one where a lot of people will be able to tack themselves on. This is kind of a transitional act as well, considering it seemed like they gathered all forces of life. They weren't just getting those that were already involved with nu metal or heavy metal in general. Fans that were, liking pop music like Slipknot, the same way that they liked Metallica. Almost like this Corey Taylor-led product was destined to become just as big as the product led by James Hetfield. Now, tit for tat, I'd say that really didn't happen, but some of the sales figures whenever it comes to Slipknot albums definitely show more than meets the eye. This is a group that was able to also survive the downfall of nu metal. Whenever nu metal was seeing its death right in the first part of the 2000s, Slipknot was still going strong. They were taking time and being careful whenever it came to their releases, and really had tread the line with traditional heavy metal just enough where it didn't really matter that they were still releasing discs. Their Maggot army was loyal, and they were continuing to support them. They continue to support them to this very day. Number 2 is Linkin Park. Linkin Park is definitely seen as nu metal to a T, mostly because they were able to use the turntables very well, because they were able to use programming very well, because their sound definitely was a little bit different, and the trademark vocals of Chester Bennington, going right alongside of Mike Shiona, were a part of that as well. The whole package just really was nu metal, almost like if you needed to give it a picture. If you needed to give just one singular picture of nu metal, a picture of Linkin Park would probably easily do. And this is a group that also was not very conventional. They showcased that they were willing to kind of go above and beyond the Call of Duty, because right after they released their first album, they then released Reanimation, which was remixes, covers, different things. And this was not something that felt like a traditional nu metal disc. Instead, it was something that had a little bit more of electronic property to it, which showed that they were not necessarily going to be expected to release the same album twice. Meteora displayed that, and subsequent albums further displayed that. Unfortunately, Chester's voice has been silenced, and that's really just a terrible thing, considering he is one of nu metal's absolute icons. Rest in peace to you, Chester. And Linkin Park is still enjoyed today. They're still absolutely beloved. Number 1, though, is Korn. Now, you might say that this seems a little bit obvious, considering Korn is the original nu metal band. This is the band that has the longest history. They go all the way back to the first part of the 1990s with the release of their debut album. And this style of music was still in its infancy, so it was not immediately sort of gravitated to or grasped onto. The videos were being shown on MTV and The Box and VH1 and the like, but the band was still largely unknown, but gaining slowly a fan base. That fan base, though, however, exploded as nu metal exploded as well. Whenever other groups seemed to join the fold, and it seemed like they had a full-fledged phenomenon on their hands, Korn became the group that became almost the seminal voice of nu metal itself. And that's because of the tracks that you got off of Follow the Leader. That's because of the tracks that you got off of Issues. That's because after Follow the Leader, there isn't a day that goes by that Korn doesn't receive tons of hits on their music. They became an absolute phenomenon. You saw the Korn shirts everywhere. I remember at one point thinking to myself, I really don't ever want to have a Korn shirt because the logo just looks kind of weird with the backwards R and everything like that. I always thought that to be a bit juvenile. But you saw the shirts everywhere, and they were really unique in design. They had a very unique style to themselves as well. And with the thick bass that you got off of that sound with John Davis's trademark voice and just the different things that were explored that felt a little bit sinister and not quite right. This was a band that wasn't necessarily just going within the realms of the traditional. They were instead going into the realms of the almost perverse. It gave Korn attitude. Not to mention, it made Korn not only edgy, but also a band to flock to, considering it was not the ordinary. It was not what you were traditionally being spoon-fed. Instead, Korn felt very, very different. And like the rest of nu metal, that was one of the reasons why fans flocked to this band in the millions. And still, even with them changing up their sound and trying different things various times here and there, Korn is still the old reliable, the band that you can always go back to if you want to remember nu metal, and really with their most recent album, the band that still has the capability to make great nu metal. They're just the group that sums up nu metal almost perfectly and to a T. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Are there any names that you thought were left off? It's only a list of 10. There were tons of nu metal bands. Let me know in the comments below. I'm coverkillernation, and hey, if you haven't subscribed to coverkillernation as of yet to this channel, the channel that you're watching me on right now, you should probably do that right now. And also hit that little notification bell. That way, every time a new video goes live, you will be the first to know about it, as well as the first to know whenever CKN starts streaming. That way you can come hang out and talk music with me directly. Anyway, I'm out of here. I'll talk to you later. Take care.